What's up, everyone? Online prep coach, Ask here at thepepcoach.com. Today, finally come out with a video on how to periodize your peptides. It's hard to actually put this in video format because it only matters on the individual, the goal, and the need. So all peptides out there, doesn't matter which peptides they are, they could be used one single time and never going for the rest of your life. They can be used infrequently throughout the week. You can use them chronically daily for months on end or years on end. So let's just put that on the board, even though it sounds like common sense. I think sometimes people get caught up in the fact that this one individual, this one protocol says only 8 weeks or only 12 weeks. Why? If the problem's not solved, why? Technically, you could take TB 500 for the rest of your life. And if you don't have any negative side effects, which it's a very low side effect profile drug, zero problems, besides wasting money if it's already done what it's supposed to do. But it's not going to hurt you other than that. BPC 157, if you have the poor response to dopaminergic receptors, yeah, that can happen. But that's a very small percentage of people. You could technically take that again for the rest of your life every single day. And guess what? If it's done all the healing, it's not doing anything extra, but you're only wasting money. There's no other negative side effects. So why is there this dogma that you have to cycle things in and out, 6 weeks on, 8 weeks on, 12 weeks on? And I think I have the answer, because it's good practice. Because even though I know this, and this is what we're talking about today, we're trying to build the framework, I think it's good practice to rotate compounds in and out, not because of receptor downregulation or any other real negative side effect reason, but I just believe it's a good practice to allow our body to accumulate stress, adapt to that, and keep going back and forth. That's the basics of Dr. Hans Selye. That's honestly how I think I've been able to have so many positive recoveries across every spectrum of athlete, sick demographic, and everything, because I stick to those basic tenets of cause a stressor, adapt to it, and keep going back and forth from stress to adaptation, stress to adaptation. Because what does that look like? Let's just draw it on the board, right? So you have a stressor in biology. It then forces an adaptation, and you go back, right? What else looks like that? AMPK and mTOR. It's a cyclical process. It's not chicken or egg. They both are always happening at all times in different cells in our bodies in different locations, right? What about basic catabolism and basic anabolism through non-mTOR and non-AMPK dependent cascades? It's a cyclical process. So my rational mind, because when I was first starting off doing these recovery modalities, working with peptides and athletes, every kind of demographic out there early back in the day, I started when we were just learning, right? You would have these players in all the time. And what ended up happening? You would abolish the stress. So because you were taking so much BPC, so much TB all the time, you abolish that stress. So then what happens? If there's no stress, there's no need to have an adaptation. If there's no adaptation, there's no progression. And you end up making people actually sicker, and their performance starts to actually dig down. This is the same kind of stuff if you look at the research in overly managing inflammation, or if you look at the changes with antioxidant supplementation, blunting the hypertrophic response. It's all just stress adaptation. That's all it is in every system in our body. I think it's also important to understand that because I know there's also arguments out there for different futile cycles where essentially you're looking at driving two different cascades that are opposing forces at the same time. That's biology, right? Like we have AMPK in my bicep right now and mTOR in my quads right now. So literally, you're driving these processes at the same time, but in different locations. And by the way, AMPK has 12 different forms. Like it's not just like AMPK is not just like everything, right? So I think that's very important to understand. We have that in the conversation with SLU and BAM15. In the whole conversation where maybe individuals say that combination's poor for you, they're arguing it from driving opposing cascades in the same mitochondria. Not all the mitochondria in your body are responding to SLU. Not all your mitochondria are responding to BAM15. And also that's a different conversation because SLU is improving that mitochondrial membrane potential, and then BAM15 is reducing it, but different conversation, but same kind of concept, right? It's stress adaptation, stress adaptation. So everyone out there that has an ebook on how to use peptides, and they're saying only cycle it in this time frame, I truly believe they have to do that because everyone needs basic guidelines. I don't think they believe it's the end-all be-all. I think anyone who has experienced work in the peptide realm understands there's so many different protocols. There's not just one go-to protocol. But if you guys don't have guidelines and framework, how do you go from there? You know, because you have to do a seminar, a long video like this, like I'm making right now, in order to have context. But that's not sexy. That's not easily packaged, right? Trying to sell to a massive audience, like probably like, and I don't even know like Dr. Seed's book or anything about the SSRP. I haven't really followed a lot of what they recommend, but I know what people say to me, and it's like very specific protocols and guidelines. And again, to me, they have to do that because how else would they get it out to a broad audience without going through every single explanation? And again, I'm not sure about them specifically, but just people in general. I think those guidelines have to be there more as a means of good practice, but understand how flexible they are, right? So let's go through, and now that we kind of understand the basics there, let's go back to the beginning of what I said, right? We could literally do things one time for eternity. Wow, that looks bad. Let's try one more time. One time for eternity. We could do it one time per week. We could do it daily for months on end. We can do it daily, essentially, for the rest of our lives. That looks pretty bad again, but I don't care. I'm only being so pedantic about this because it only matters on the individual and on the problem. So I'm going to teach you guys how to do this and how to figure out your own formula for yourself, for your clients, and for anyone else you're working with. Because to me, if we understand this basic rule that there essentially are no rules, then you start picking up on trends and patterns between torn muscles, broken ligaments and tendons and TBIs and Alzheimer patients and athletes and all this stuff. And it gives you a more cohesive plan that's specific, because the specificity, there we go, makes the complete difference. It makes all the difference. So a couple of different scenarios, right? Let's go with, let's go basic first. Someone who's just trying to recomp, right? So this is someone who is trying to build some muscle, lose some fat, and drive longevity, be healthier, like just some of the basic stuff, right? Usually in this kind of demographic, we know that a lot of our physique-based goals, if it's driving performance, if it's driving body composition changes, we got about 12 to 20 weeks, right? To me, usually mesocycles are done in roughly 12 to 20 week increments because you need that much time to really see an adaptation. If you're a bodybuilder trying to get stage ready, 12 to 20 weeks, most of the time. If you're trying to build a depression amount of muscle tissue, 12 to 20 weeks. If you're trying to change a vast majority of health problems, just drive longevity, 12 to 20 weeks. The majority, again, this is actually going back to how myocytes and how cells adapt. We're always looking at about 12 to 20 weeks. It's always coming back to that rough time frame. So if we're trying to recomp, there's the duration, right? So within this duration, we are going to go ahead and layer in different peptides. We're going to assume HRT is already taken care of, androgens are already taken care of, whatever the problem is there. Let's look at some of the basics. And I'll try to have a couple different examples. So in here, let's say this person is going to be working in a tesamorelin, an ipamorelin, and then let's say they're going to do for the recomp, we're going to go more so with an SLU-PP332, and we'll leave it to 3 compounds just to make it very applicable for everyone. So we have releasing hormone, releasing peptide on the somatropic axis, right? So we are increasing the pulse and the actual spike and peak of the pulse, and we're also elongating the duration. And then we're driving the mitochondrial cascades with SLU, which is also driving up that mitochondrial membrane potential, and then further driving up glycolysis, anabolism, beta oxidation, all the stuff we already know about, right? So let's say in the initial 4 weeks, because again, this can be tweaked and modulated based on the response week to week. Well, let's say general, we're going to be doing 200 micrograms. Actually, we're going to do both of these. Usually we can dose TESA and IPA, however you want to pronounce that, at the same dose. And in this scenario, because we're trying to drive a recomp, we're going to be doing 200 micrograms subcutaneous in the AM, staying fasted for an hour, and then again repeated before bed, making sure that we don't eat for roughly an hour or 2 hours beforehand. Again, these growth hormone related peptides are dependent upon endogenous release and action. So it's not like the exogenous growth hormone, which you can override any insulin signaling. These are more dependent upon food and circulation. That being said, though, if you would actually test acute IGF, actually test acute growth hormone values, because growth hormone is a terrible blood marker to check for because it's so acute, but it's also a great blood marker to test for because it's so acute. So in certain individuals that really have labs like down the street from them and they do this for a living or they own the labs, we've tested this. And even after a pretty big meal, they only waited 30, 45 minutes before bed. We repeated this with hundreds of people over the years, by the way. But with these individuals in specific that own the labs, only a couple dozen. Again, 30, 40 minutes after a meal, still had the 200 micrograms of TESA and IPA. And guess what? They still saw a massive, robust spike in growth hormone, which means long-term IGF levels are going to be going up. So in this scenario, although we're trying to avoid some foods, excuse me, it's not the end all be all if you have a little bit of food and don't wait as long. It's just going to work slightly better if you wait, usually upwards of 60 to 90 minutes, right? And the SLU is going to come in, depending on this individual, at about 100 micrograms AM orally, and we're going to see how they actually respond, okay? So as the weeks go on, it is as simple as every week at check-in time with yourself or with your coach, reassess, okay? We know we're pushing this recomp. We know we roughly have 12 to 20 weeks. So after 2 weeks, because these aren't androgens for a longer ester, and no matter what, in all of pharmacology, it's actually 5. 5 applications in order to hit peak plasma concentrations. That matters for androgens, does not apply to peptides because chemical signaling is completely different than androgens. So every week we go by, let's say week 2 goes by, everything's progressing good, but we want a little bit faster progress. I would probably first go ahead and increase the underlying mitochondrial factors, push it up to 200 micrograms, hold that for a week. Next week goes by, increase the TESA and IPA both up to 400 micrograms. You keep going this rotating back and forth. So maybe by week 12, you're upwards of a full milligram of TESA, a full milligram of IPA, both AM and PM. And then you're taking about, we'll say 600 micrograms of something like SLU. You get to your goal, you hit those high doses, right? At that point for this recomping scenario, if you don't want to bring in exogenous growth hormone, you keep these in. You can pull back the dose. You can undulate things up and down. Or if you have the finances and you like the response and you're healthy, you can keep it high. You can keep those worked up to their highest dose longer term based on your response. On the other side, though, we have the SLU, which again, since it's so chemically strong, it can just cause so much overspinning of the mitochondria because what's happening, we're having too high of a millivoltage change in the mitochondrial level. We are overspinning, and that's going to start throwing off a lot of reactive oxygen species. So almost no matter what, I would probably pull down the SLU. I'd either pull down the dose or rotate out with something else. But that's a recomp scenario, how to periodize 3 basic peptides over something like a 12 to 20 week course. Now let's go slightly different route. Let's go, instead of recomping, let's do a bicep tear. Bicep tears are pretty easy, right? We'll do a bicep tear. Let's say it is completely off the bone. To me, I really like about 4 to 6 weeks max for recovery time frame. This is a completely different scenario on how you'd periodize it. 4 to 6 weeks, the moment you get an injury is the moment you want to apply peptides. What you do pre-op determines what you do and how fast you recover post-op. So I know there was people, when I say people, I just mean randomly. I've heard it on the internet, and there's never anyone specific because I don't follow people, but people would say that you don't want to blunt the inflammatory response as soon as there's an injury, so don't take these peptides, when in reality, you want to start the recovery process. Because when they go into surgery, they're moving things and cutting things. The more fortified your system is and already in the recovery trend, you're training your body to recover the moment they're reattaching that bicep to its tendon. So you're lessening the damage that the surgeon is doing by cutting you open. You're also, how can I say this nicely? In case you have a bad surgeon, you are prophylactically acting against them making a mistake, which I think is pretty important because people have off days. Like, let's just be honest. And sometimes people are good at their jobs, sometimes people are bad at their jobs. It just happens. So instead, the moment something happens, we take a bolus. So immediately, we're going to say there's a tear, happens at the gym, literally get your butt home, and the first thing you should do, again, male or female, we're going to say this tear is completely off the tendon. So it's shriveled up, it's all the way up in your shoulder type thing. You would literally put it directly into that balled up bicep. Ideally, we would do 10 milligrams full of both BPC plus 10 milligrams of TB plus, in this scenario, probably 25 milligrams GHK. And if we have it, growth hormone would come in massively. So this is where we would prefer to have exogenous growth hormone at about 10 IUs of actual GH. So that is the moment the tear happens, okay? Then what you have to do next is go through your doctor, plan the surgeries, because in these kind of scenarios, you would need to get it actually translocated and just moved around. So what we do is we pull down to a baseline protocol, and until surgery happens, so until surgery is actually scheduled, we would pull down, and we would pull this down to a baseline of 1 milligram of BPC plus 1 milligram of TB, plus for the GHK, we'd probably only take that down to about 3 milligrams GHK, and we pull that down about 3 IUs of GH. So now you go ahead, you talk to your doctor, you get your surgery actually scheduled. This tastes good. It is Danger Coffee with 5 grams of MCT oil powder from Bub's Natural. A little more BHB to liver, to the brain, good to go exogenous ketone wise. Okay, so you schedule your surgery, then you have to have a plan. So usually we start about a week pre-op where we'll manipulate this, but for this video, we're gonna say, hold this until the day of surgery, so morning of surgery. So surgery's planned, so AM of the actual surgery, we are going to have a bolus because we are about to be cut open, torn apart, things are gonna be moved that weren't supposed to be moved, put back in place, and there might be foreign objects coming into our body. So we would want a higher dose of not quite the bolus we had amount, but half of that generally. So you do 5 milligrams, so 1 full vial of BPC, 1 full vial of TB, plus we can round that roughly up to 15 milligrams, so roughly half of the GHK, but then we want to really push growth hormone hard this day. We would do that AM of surgery. We'd go get the surgery, again, ideally putting it directly into the area, come home from surgery, and then apply this sub-Q as close to area as possible, never moving bandages or stitches or anything like that. We would then repeat this immediately post-surgery. So you would literally go ahead and you would come home from the doctors, and let's say it's in your bicep, have your wife put it into your shoulder. You can pull back some sub-Q layers there. Because remember, Mr. Gravity is going to pull these proteins and peptides down. Usually a good rule of thumb, if you're going intramuscular into a site, go like an inch or two above the injection site, because gravity pulls us down. I can do like the elevator trick, right? Gravity pulls us down. That actually looks pretty good. My kids would appreciate it, maybe you guys don't. Either way, we would do that, and then in this scenario, assuming everything went well, no craziness, we would go ahead, we would repeat this process again with 1 mg, 1 mg, 3 mgs, 3 IUs, and probably keep that in for about 3 weeks. Then we would go ahead and reassess. So when we're talking about periodizing peptides, it's completely different if you're only sticking to a recomp scenario with 3 compounds, right? Completely different if you tore a bicep and you have 4 to 6 weeks, because after these 4 to 6 weeks are done, you pretty much drop all this. There's no need for it anymore. You recovered the bicep. There may be other areas that need more attention, so maybe they would come back in, but in terms of solving the goal and the problem, you're good to go. So I like thinking about it in terms of everything we do, solve the goal. Your HRT, lifelong goal you got to solve. That's always in there. Growth hormone related peptides, I think that would be more of a long-term endeavor. Now, certain people that don't want to, because that's a whole other conversation. And actually, no, I'm not going to do it in a different video. I'm going to put it in right here, because this is all about peptide periodization. So now we're going to go from recomping to a bicep tear. We're going to be going to growth hormone peptide periodization. Now, I think this is important to understand because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. To give you guys, at least people that maybe don't know my background, I wrote the Growth Hormone Somatropic Bible that is now on this member site years ago. And when I was doing that, I spent so many years and thousands upon thousands of dollars going to growth hormone deficient forums and going to acromegaly forums and paying people for their blood work, paying people for what they were being prescribed, how they felt, getting as much information as I possibly could. As you dig deeper into these trials, as you actually read the research in growth hormone deficient individuals or individuals that were just given growth hormone therapies, 24 hours. People and individuals that took exogenous growth hormone for, I think the time frame was 7 to 9 years or 10 years, somewhere in that time frame, recovered full endogenous production of their growth hormone released after 24 hours. And they were on for 7 to 10 years. So taking exogenous growth hormone for that long, your endogenous production kicks back on. Why? How does that happen? If you read the ebook, I talk about it. Essentially, it's because when we have that, because remember, your exogenous growth hormone, when you take it, it is a 22 kilodalton variety. We also have that 20 kilodalton variety. If you are working in the drug-tested realms and you want to beat the isoform test, which is looking at the ratio difference between these two, you just take a compound product with both of those, heads up. But we are getting a 22 kilodalton product. The problem with that, though, is in our system, everything that gets released is there is a 17 kilodalton, a 15 kilodalton, a 5 kilodalton, and then there are oligomers, homodimers, heterodimers, different glycosylated versions of growth hormone, as well as all of the growth factors that come from there. So not just your IGF-1. That's why IGF-1 doesn't mean too much on lab test. It's still a good marker to check, but your liver's spitting out thousands of different growth factors. Vascular endothelial growth factor, the list goes on and on, right? So if we understand this, exogenous growth hormone is not the boogeyman, right? The problem always comes in from a dosage aspect. And obviously not everyone responds well to everything, but longevity doses of growth hormone are 3 IUs and less. Whereas athletic dose of growth hormone can be 4 IUs plus. You can still get the most amount of effect out of 1 IU, 2 IUs, 3 IUs. You don't have to take 4 plus if you're an athlete. But once you cross over that 4 IU threshold, usually negative side effects have more of a potential to skew up. In bodybuilding, growth hormone doses are like 6 IUs plus, most of the time for most people. In longevity communities, usually about 1/8 of an IU to maybe 2 to 3 IUs. That's a good range, but most stick around probably about 1 or 2 IUs. If you're looking in other professional sports, we are usually avoiding growth hormone, exogenously growth hormone, and using other different varieties. And we're actually tending to go away from the somatropic compounds because they're very easily detected. We can take other players to drive recovery. If we're looking in CrossFit and like the Olympic Games and stuff like that, whenever we know there's going to be a drug test, then we're sticking with a 22 kilodalton growth hormone or taking the isoform combination. And if we know when a drug test is coming, you take it out of your system and you what is the clearance rates for females? They clear a little bit faster, about 2 days, and isoforms go back to normal. And males take about 3 days because it's liver sexuality differences. So either way, that's a little bit more than I wanted to talk about, but I want to make sure you guys have a full understanding that your endogenous production of growth hormone is almost never in jeopardy. It really isn't, besides age. Literally, the age is the only thing that slowly starts to decline or release of endogenous growth hormone levels. So to me, it's more a matter of what do you feel comfortable doing? So you could take it a bunch of different ways. But to me, when we're looking at periodizing growth hormone peptides, and we're just going to say growth hormone as a whole, right? I think the growth hormone replacement, once you're 30 plus years old, should be a forever type of replacement, right? Now, what that doesn't mean is that you can only take exogenous growth hormone. That does not mean you can only take peptides. You can rotate these things back and forth. It's not doing anything for your pituitary. It's not doing anything to preserve your own endogenous production, but it still could be a means of good practice because what's going on here, right? If we have the different categories, we have something like straight exogenous growth hormone, or we have, I'll actually put it over here. We have exogenous, we have more of the enzyme player like MK677, and then we have more of the, we'll say, traditional peptide receptor varieties. We have straight GH, we have MK677, and then over here we have ipamorelin, tesamorelin, all the GHRPs, we have CJC 1295, we have all these. I see them being classified in 3 different categories. Now, assuming you're over 30, or you're an athlete, or you're driving longevity, like pretty much everyone to me should be having some kind of growth hormone stimulation in play. You can have a couple of things you could do. You could just work up your baseline and just have exogenous growth hormone in play. Again, if you're going to be more in the longevity world, longevity individuals are more so looking at less than 3 IUs. If you're favoring more athletics, body composition, you can go above 3 IUs. You don't have to. It is all based on your response. But you could just take exogenous growth hormone for the rest of your life, regrow your thymic gland, and start to really just produce longevity-based effects, drive anabolism, drive beta oxidation, drive oligodendrogenesis in the brain. So oligodendrogenesis is the process of rebuilding oligodendrocytes to improve cell-cell communication, all that kind of good stuff. We could take that forever, right? We could also then layer in or completely switch over to something like MK677. MK, I have had individuals run it for upwards of 2 to 3 years, I believe. So prolonged usage because they did not want to inject. They just wanted to have an oral counterpart. And we would dose it usually below 25 milligrams. So usually we dose this sub 25 milligrams. It is acutely dependent upon receptor binding of magnesium ions. So if you're taking more MK, jack up your magnesium bisglycinate by like 100 milligrams, nothing too crazy. But MK can be a long-term replacement, but it has higher negative side effect profile. More than anything, actually. So more than exogenous growth hormone, more than IPM tests, GHRPs, CJCs, all that stuff, because if you look at how it's working from an enzymatic aspect, it is going ahead, it's modulating ghrelin. So appetite shoots up, number one. Deep sleep and REM sleep absolutely shoot up. Nitrogen retention shoots up. Most people that take MK walk around feeling full all day. It feels like you just got out of the gym. So maybe MK at a higher dose is more so leaning towards the athletic individual. Whereas at a lower dose, you can get away with not having any kind of glucose dysfunction, no kind of extra edema, really no negative pressure at all, but it's dose dependent, right? So we're actually going to erase this, and we are going back to this longevity dose. And I have had individuals in the longevity community just not want to inject anything, so they want the oral counterpart. So we will do 1 to 5 milligrams longer term. Athletes, we generally go with 10 to 25 milligrams longer term. Now, again, I'll throw another kind of curveball at you guys. If that's how you throw the curveball, I don't know. I've never thrown a curveball. But if you have your exogenous growth hormone and you want to potentiate its actions, because exogenous, the hormone, right? If we remember, hormones are up here. Below hormones, what do we have? You remember, right? We have different kinds of cells. Below cells, we essentially have these enzymes. Below enzymes, we have essentially subatomic particles. Below that, we have our quantum world. So, and you can rearrange this a couple different ways, but essentially, the enzymatic system can help the cells work to help the hormones work better. So over here, you could instead half your growth hormone dose, whether it's longevity or athletic, cut it in half and add either 5 milligrams of MK if you're doing it for longevity, or 10 milligrams of MK if you're doing it for the athletic purpose side of things. And you care more about performance, body composition, all that kind of stuff, right? But what you can also do, because if you could do that daily, you could also do weekdays of exogenous growth hormone and then weekends of no exogenous growth hormone, but only MK to restore enzymatic aspects and restore enzymatic systems. So you could do this a bunch of different ways. And this is why it's so fun to periodize and program. There is, now covering that, right? Everyone says go 5 days on, 2 days off. In reality, that's a great therapy for someone who gets a lot of the negative fluid retention edema. But I also hear that and go, I'd lower the dose. You don't have that chronically. We're looking at these as being very much non-genomic players acutely happening, right? They're still genomic long-term, but very much non-genomic. So you're missing 2 days of progress, 2 days of growth, 2 days of recovery by not taking your growth hormone peptides on the weekends as well. So I've always been like, I'd rather do it a lower dose daily versus a higher dose infrequently. Because usually those bolus amounts is where you run into more negative side effects anyway. So, and again, you could still do it different ways. There's nothing wrong with the 5 on 2 off. Generally, I'd rather do lower dose of growth hormone during the weekend. If you're going to take the 2 weekends off or the 2 days a week on the weekend off, don't do exogenous growth hormone. Replace it with the enzymatic player of MK. Now we have all the peptides, the growth hormone releasing hormones, and the peptides to stimulate a higher pulse, higher peak concentration, and elongate that pulse. This is where it's interesting because you could literally take, I just did a podcast with Hacking Media 2 weeks ago. We talked about this. You could take all of them. So you have the hormone stimulation, you have the enzymatic stimulation, and these will stimulate the growth hormone receptor to make your growth hormone work better. So if you really want to get fancy schmancy with it, you could precede your growth hormone dose about 69 minutes beforehand with a dose of a growth hormone peptide to make your growth hormone work better so you can take less, and then top that off before bed with the enzymatic player. That is very much sometimes overkill, being completely honest. It's usually not needed, but you can get fancy, and certain people that don't respond well to higher dose of exogenous growth hormone would respond better to this type of a therapy. And it is pretty elegant, it's pretty finessey, it's pretty cool, right? So this is where we'll dose them roughly the same besides CJC with DAC. So DAC's the drug affinity complex. We're not gonna talk about that yet. We'll put that over here, actually, because that's kind of its own player. Okay, so generally we're looking at, if we're looking at the longevity doses of any of these, we're looking at about 100 micrograms upwards to maybe something like 500 micrograms, right? In the athletic communities, we could be going 500 micrograms plus, and that's of each. So the chemical dosage threshold on these tends to be, once you get above a milligram, you start to see a point of diminishing return. And so usually, let's just say you're having, let's say you're doing Tessa and IPA together. You're doing them both combined, right? You take them both in the morning. Say for athletes, you're taking them both in the morning at 500 micrograms each, total of a milligram. You could work them up to both being a milligram, but once you go above 1 milligram in one bolus, we tend to not see the same return on either our blood work or our body composition changes, our biofeedback, nothing. So usually we're kind of topped off at about a milligram. Some people can go up to 2+ milligrams in one bolus. I would rather split a milligram AM, milligram PM of Tessa, and then a milligram AM, a milligram PM of IPA, if you're doing something like that. Do it a bunch of different ways, but that's the rough range we're looking at. And again, if you want to get fancy schmancy with it, you could do weekends only of MK, weekdays of growth hormone peptides, whatever dose you need, for 69 minutes beforehand, before bed, and then take your exogenous growth hormone. Usually for people like that, I usually tell them, and I say, you know, when you get ready for bed, first take your peptides, brush your teeth, take your shower, talk with your partner, put your kids to bed, come back, then right before you lay down to bed, take your growth hormone. Because as a parent, there's always one more thing to do. So you have at least an hour, right? For most of us parents anyway. So, oh, my coffee's spilling everywhere. Too bad, I'll clean it up later. Okay, so now we have CJC with DAC. This is the drug affinity complex that technically lasts about 10 days, but we just say a week because it's easier. You can work that up stupid high, but of everything up here, it has probably, because the growth hormone bleed effect that comes from it, usually has more negative side effects than even MK. And MK is strong. So normal chemical signaling-wise with CJC DAC, I like this if someone's traveling, because you take it one time per week. So to me, CJC with DAC is preferred if you're traveling, because you take it before you leave. Usually you come back a week later, you're good to go type thing. You can switch back, right? So to me, this is generally the traveling player. It is an injection, sub-Q, you don't have to take anything with you. The dosages can range anywhere from 1 to 10 milligrams. I have seen people have stupid high IGF levels upwards of 800, which is crazy from something like a peptide. Again, though, with that comes the most amount of negative side effects. So up here, if you are negative side effect prone, I would stay away from CJC with DAC because that has the most negative side effects. Following that, again, not as bad, but has more potential as the dosage gets worked up, is the MK. And then from there, exogenous growth hormone and the peptides are somewhat similar depending on the dosage. But in terms of periodizing these things, to me, growth hormone is a forever thing. Once we hit 30 years old, thymic gland calcifies, superoxide dismutase levels go down, stem cell release goes down, growth hormone production goes down, sarcopenia, literally you start to lose muscle tissue, that starts to increase. All these things, glycolytic fiber type transformation changes. Everything changes once you hit 30 to 50, depending on who you are. But I think growth hormone is more of a forever time of periodization. So I think there's a time and a place to go through these different aspects. Right now, I'm personally about to add in a little bit of peptides to potentiate my exogenous growth hormone. Growth hormone wise, I was at 5 or 6 I used for a pretty long period of time, just put it back down to 4. Because for me being 260 pounds, I needed that just to keep up with how much my training was, how much my life was. Because remember, growth hormone is one of the best players for neurological recovery. The amount of TBIs, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's individuals that I've helped reverse just with growth hormone is crazy. So that's where we're gonna go next. Now let's talk about peptide periodization for someone with some kind of neurological dysfunction and disease. Because growth hormone forever, right? Now in this kind of neurologically traumatic world, right? This is one, okay, that looks good. This is one where I'm just gonna say TBIs, but we're kind of looking at everything, right? So anything neurological. So TBI plus anything neurochemical. There's going to be a forever component, but there's also gonna be some acute players. So normally in this kind of TBI, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, because remember, we don't care. So if you go the clinical route, clinical medicine, nothing wrong with them, no hard feelings, not saying anything bad. They give you a diagnosis and you are just classified by that diagnosis. So the diagnosis to me is upstream. It's way up here. What's not being looked at? Downstream, everything down here at the subcellular and cellular level. That is what dictates what happens upstream. So we can fix the problem downstream, then it fixes everything midstream and upstream. Technically, clinical medicine goes more midstream, and you're not attacking the end goal of biofeedback or the initial start, the initial genesis of what's causing this. So we would prefer to solve the problem based off biofeedback and not care about specific diagnosis. Because yes, there are differences between ADHD and Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's, but there's also a difference between left and right brain types. There's all these different types of TBIs, all these different types of Alzheimer's, dementias, Parkinson's. So instead of trying to classify it and be so specific, neurochemistry doesn't work that way. We have the law of locality, which means things are so closely connected and correlated. You heal one area, these neurons crosstalk, they cross-communicate all the time. We can heal this neuron to fix the neuron right here, because guess what? In our brains, it's like this close. You can't even see the difference. Something popped up on my, there we go, that's gone. Something popped up on the screen. Don't want to see that, but something else popped up. Come on. I'm going to have to stop, and when I record these, go on airplane mode. Okay. So although it matters about the end goal, because there is a difference between TBIs, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, you're fixing the underlying problem. So we're not going to attach the specifics to this video. This is looking, again, talking about peptide periodization and focusing more so on that. Focusing more so on the things that can apply to all neurochemical problems, right? So growth hormone is one we talked about. Will drive oligodendrogenesis. In the periodized world, we're looking at that being more of a forever player. You will first of all work that up, and then once you heal and recover from the TBI, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, whatever the neurochemical problem is, you slowly pull back, and we can work this up to upwards of 4 IUs, 10 IUs. It depends on the individual and the dysfunction. Once it's solved, pull it back down to sub 3, because that's when the longevity side of things kicks in, assuming that this is for a dysfunctional individual, which this category, that's what we're assuming. What other peptides? BBC 157, decent, but what actually heals the brain better? TB500. So TB500, especially nasal sprays, going straight through that nasal canal. That's one where it's going to be more of a 12 to 20-week player. Again, will depend on how severe the problem is, but initially daily for 12 to 20 weeks. And then we would go into a rotational setting where maybe it's only on weekends after that. So you get all the healing done first, and it's a daily player for 12 to 20 weeks. Then you rotate it and periodize it to just be infrequently, maybe only on the weekends. And again, I'd prefer that to be a nasal spray. It works that much better, neurochemically driven. Now, okay, we have GHK, or rather we have TB500, we have GH. We're also going to GHKCU now because we need a little more stem cell migration. Anytime there's a neurochemical problem, there's gut-based dysfunction, which then bleeds over into the stem cell, bone marrow-based world. Every single time, endogenous stem cell release goes down. So we want to actually truncate that and fix that problem, generally with something like a GHKCU. We don't need this in as long, generally in this neurologically diseased world. Generally only 12 weeks. You're more than good to go. We might then rotate that out with something else, like a stem regen, or we could do some rebounding work. So by you jumping up and down, bouncing up and down, and causing that bone-based trauma and stressors, it's going to cause your bone to release more stem cells in the circulation. That's just endogenous production, which is pretty cool. So usually that's a shorter term player. You drop it out, probably don't need it again. But then we go into this, I'm putting this peptide periodization kind of loosely, because to me, all these small molecules are basically peptides. It's all kind of terminology, but cerebrolysine, cortexin, dihexa, things could really be layered in traumatically here. Generally, if we only had to stick with, because we have 3, we have to stick with 5. We will do dihexa, and then we're going to do Nuopept. The dihexa is going to drive more cell-to-cell communication, increase connectivity. The Nuopept is going to go ahead and drive down glutamate toxicity. Usually in this neurologically diseased world, damaged world, glutamate's high, GABA's low. So usually there's that imbalance. We're going to kick that back up. It'll drive up motor cortex functioning. So all of a sudden now the Alzheimer's or dementia individual who can't even write in cursive all of a sudden can, because we're improving their motor cortex functioning. It's going to improve focus, concentration, volition. It's going to do everything positive. Generally though, for these kind of scenarios, we are doing about 12 weeks. Same thing with GHK. We can get a lot of healing in the neurochemical world in about 12 weeks. After that, and that's not to say you can use them less than this, usually upwards of 12 weeks, and you can rotate them out. Bunch of different ways you could do this, but again, the whole point of this video is periodizing. If you've noticed, we've done different things this entire time, from a recomp with only a couple peptides, to a torn bicep, to talking about growth hormone periodization, to now talking about fixing a TBI. And you've seen there's been some things for a couple weeks, some things for 1 day, some things for only on weekends, some things for 12 weeks, some things forever. So the moral and the take home of this video is really base it off the goal. Take a compound for the goal, solve the goal, drop it out, rotate it with something else if you still need that goal to be hit. Because if we're always eternally trying to get smarter, lose body fat, build muscle tissue, keep it to the mesocycle of 12 to 20 weeks, fix the problem, rotate into something else. And as you do that so many times, you will find the 2 compounds that respond best to you in the neurochemical world or in the healing world, and the other ones don't work as well. Stick to those 2. And then month 1 of this one, month 1 of that one, and rotate back and forth. Play with doses because that changes over time. But that's pretty much how we look at periodizing our peptides. This is going to be part 1 because I'm going to go into more examples in the future, but I hope this gives you a good framework to understand if anyone says, only ever do this rotation, only ever use this for 8 weeks, like GHKCU. I know the argument is the copper accumulation. I have never seen a copper toxicity problem from nearly anyone taking GHKCU at high doses longer term. I believe mainly because that copper is used up in the healing binding process of transmission, and it's not actually going into the plasma and doing anything. It's essentially being used up before there's even cell-to-cell interactions and communication. Because how could you take 10 milligrams of GHKCU daily for 2 years, only have better skin, better hair, healthier bones, healthier everything, and still mid-tier copper levels on lab works? So to me, things like that still aren't straightforward. I hope this video helps out. As always, thank you guys so much for watching.